All right, let's jump right in.
Failing to signal a lane change.
Riding in your girlfriend's car with a child in the back.
Run into the bathroom in your own apartment.
Selling cigarettes outside of a corner store.
Riding a commuter train.
Walking home with a friend.
Making eye contact.
Selling CDs outside of a supermarket.
Wearing a hoodie. Walking away from police.
Walking toward police. Missing a front license plate.
Holding a fake gun in the park in Ohio.
Driving with a broken brake light. Sitting in your car before your bachelor party.
Walking up the stairwell of your apartment building.
Calling for help after an accident.
Holding a fake gun in Virginia.
On the way to Bible study.
Holding a fake gun in Walmart.
Laughing.
Holding a wallet.
For attending a birthday party.
Doing absolutely nothing.
Not surviving enough. Go to weareheremovement.com to tell President Obama and Congress that the time for change is now.
So just even before I start talking, what I'd like to invite you to do is to turn around and choose somebody, just one other person, and share for a moment. I mean, just for a minute or two. Not a long story about it, but what feelings get evoked when you see that video? I know that it's the F word in the academy is sometimes feelings, but you know. So we know that we react to these things in very different ways. You know, we know some people react in ways like this and other people react in ways like this. Underneath all of this is fear. You know, how many people notice that you feel more afraid right now than you can remember? Just generally, now I'm talking about collective societal fear, that you feel more fear in your neighborhoods, in your communities, in our culture now than you can remember feeling most times of your life, right? This constant flood of fear. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to break this down a little bit to look at, you know, how is this impacting us? Because this is no longer a circumstance where we're afraid of this incident or that incident. I'd assert that since 9/11, we've been living in a culture of post-traumatic stress. And it was fed, you know, by 9/11 and the threat of terrorism. It was fed by the financial breakdown of our culture and the economic impact that that's had on people. It's been fed, of course, by the racial tension that has been exposed. And, you know, I'm sure that nobody in this room who doesn't understand that the incidents that we've been seeing didn't start happening a few years ago. What started happening is that we have cameras to record them. You know, so all of a sudden, things that were happening become exposed. And of course, it's had gasoline thrown on it by this political campaign that we've been in over the last couple of years. And so this is the nature of what we're talking about. So what I'd like to do with the short time I have with you is to unpack that a little bit, what we're learning about where this comes from and why it affects us the way it does, and a couple of things that we could talk about things that we can do about it. And we're also going to save time at the end for some questions. And so what I'd rather do is have the questions at the end, just because it makes it easier for me to manage the time. So please, if you do have questions, jot them down so that you don't forget them, so that at the end we can take whatever time we have left to talk about them. Okay? Good. So first of all, I want to talk about this notion of bias, because, and I actually titled my book Everyday Bias, because I know that it's hard to tell sometimes what's conscious and what's unconscious. You certainly can't tell by interviewing somebody. You go up and say, excuse me, were you intentional about that? Oh, no, I didn't realize I was doing it. Now, are they telling the truth? Sometimes yes. Or are they hiding? Sometimes yes. So that's why I talk about everyday bias more. But we have an unbelievable body of evidence now around unconscious bias. A lot of you know there have been somewhere between 12 and 1,500 studies over the last 10 years alone of this phenomenon and how it shows up in many ways, not just race, although I'll be focusing mostly on that in our conversation because we have a limited time, but it's just about every aspect of our lives. So for example, Ian Ayres at Yale University, actually when he was at Northwestern before that, did this study. He sent actors and actresses out into a Chicago car dealership, or into Chicago car dealerships, I should say, to buy the same car from the same car salesman. All the same features, everything the same. The only difference was the actors and actresses, some were white and some were black. They were given the same profile financially, even were instructed to wear similar clothing, age, everything else about them was similar except for their race and gender. White men were offered the cars on average $725 over invoice price. White women, $935, about 30% more. Black women, $1,195, about 70% more. Black men, same cars by the same car salesman, $1,687, 230% of what white men were offered. And what he told me was that when they went and interviewed afterwards the car salesman, they weren't surprised that there was a difference. They were shocked by how big the difference was. But what shocked them even more was that none of the car salesmen seemed to have any conscious idea, and these are psychologists who are trained to interview people, had any conscious idea that there was any pattern in what they were doing. In the car salesman's mind, they were getting as much as they could from each person. So I was pretty skeptical about that until I got a chance to work in a car dealership. A friend of mine is an attorney in D.C. who one of his clients was one of these mega, these huge car dealerships. And so I got a chance to work with some of the car salesmen who, they were all men, but they were from every different racial group you could imagine. And they were having some issues. So I told them about this study, just out of curiosity, a couple of groups at lunch. And I said, what do you think? I was shocked by how matter of fact they were. Well, of course. I said, what do you mean, of course? They said, well, you got to filter out the lookers. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, it turns out that in car world, there are people who are buyers and people who are lookers. There are a lot of people who go into car dealerships with no intention to buy a car. They just like to test drive the new cars. And if you're a car salesman, that's the death of you, because they'll take 2 to 3 times more time and you get nothing out of it. So I said, well, why is that relevant to here? Well, everybody knows more black people are lookers than white people. And so continue. They said, well, when you have a looker, what you do is you get really aggressive, you throw big numbers at them, and you make them uncomfortable, and they go somewhere else to test drive. Well, so I did a little research. Not only were they wrong, but way wrong, like to a 7-to-1 ratio, lookers to buyers are white. But an entire industry's pattern is built on this myth. Here's another one. This researcher, Aaron Reeves, gave law firm partners a memo that was supposedly written by a guy named Thomas Meyer. It intentionally had 22 errors in it, and they were alternately told that Thomas Meyer was white or black. When they were told when he was white, this is the same exact memo they're looking at, word for word, not a single thing changed. When they were told that he was white, they rated it 4.1 out of 5, roughly found about 10 errors, and you can see some of the comments. Has potential, good analytic skills, generally good writer, but needs to work on such and such. When they were told that that same memo was Thomas Meyer and he was black, his rating dropped to 3.2, 40% more errors were found, and this Thomas Meyer needs a lot of work, average at best. Can't believe he went to NYU. In the medical domain, now this study is a little older, but it still holds up, that doctors were shown pictures of men and women presenting primary cardiology symptoms, and 40% more white men than either white women or men and women of color were sent to advanced cardiology procedures. Not at all unlike another study that was just done a few years ago at Harvard and Mass General, where they gave people the implicit association test. How many people are familiar with the implicit association test? You may want to jot that down, implicit association test. You can Google it and get the place. It's a free online test that's designed to give you feedback about what some of the unconscious implicit associations you make about people are. Now, mind you, if you do decide to go in a test, there are about 20 of them with different groups, white and black, male and female, etc. It is not a report card on your soul. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It simply is a kind of view into our internal wiring, how we make certain connections based on what we've been exposed to. And we're going to talk about that whole process in just a few minutes. And so they did that with doctors, and then they tracked the doctor's behavior in terms of sending patients to thrombolysis procedures, and found that there was almost a direct relationship, that doctors who tested more positively towards white sent more white patients to the procedures, for example. And then this one, which is just a bit difficult, but just a different area, but just to show you how this shows up in a lot of different areas, and that is accent. These researchers at the University of Tel Aviv and the University of Chicago found that we tend to trust people more when they have accents similar to ours, and less when they have accents different from ours, with one exception. Anybody want to? British, that's exactly right. We don't only think that people with British accents make better movie villains, they're also smarter, you know. I have a client in New York, and one of the people who works there is from Liverpool, which most of us know from the Beatles, you know. And, but it's a blue-collar city, and they speak a form of British English there, which is called Scouse or Scouse. I forget how it's pronounced exactly. But it's considered gutter English, a little bit like people refer to Ebonics in our culture, you know, less than. And he says whenever he goes back to visit his family in the UK and then flies back to New York, he feels himself getting smarter every mile he flies. You know? But how much credibility do we give people when they speak English in a different syntax or a different language? This is also becomes a racial phenomenon, of course, to us. And then this one, which is just for fun because it's one of my favorite new ones. This came out of the National Academy of Sciences just 2 years ago. They studied hurricanes to see whether there was any issue of any difference in fatality between male and female hurricanes, named hurricanes, and found that hurricanes named after women kill roughly twice as many people as hurricanes named after men. Now, this has nothing to do with hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. The reason, believe it or not, this is the National Academy of Sciences. This is not some hippies on a hilltop in California. Believe that the reason it happens, believe it or not, is because we take hurricanes named after men more seriously and therefore prepare more. Now think how insane that is. Bob comes up to me and says, Howard, there's a hurricane coming. I say, really, what's its name? He says, Hurricane Marilyn. I say, don't worry, it's a girl. This is how crazy we are. And you know, we could go on. I could give you examples. Like I said, we're going to focus on race today, but I could give you examples in terms of every identity characteristic of human beings you can imagine. I could give you an academic study that shows how we discriminate or we have bias towards folks. The question is not do we have bias, the question is which are ours. We all have this. And so we want to try to, with the brief time we have, understand this phenomenon and see how it's playing out, and particularly in the context of what's going on in our culture right now, because we're in a context, as I said before, where gasoline is being thrown on these tendencies on a daily basis. So how many of you, when you hear the word bias, associate negativity to it? Just raise your hand. Yeah, this is for the most part the paradigm that we've created in our culture. Bias is badness, and therefore we need to get rid of it. But there's a problem with that paradigm, and that is that bias is actually neither good nor bad. It's simply a tendency or inclination that results in judgment without question. Sometimes it can save our lives. Somebody's coming across the, you know, or I'll do it even more simply. What's your first name? Jennifer?
Gyra.
Gyra, excuse me. I come up to Gyra with a knife in my hand, and I go like this. She doesn't look up and say, I wonder what that is and what he's going to do with it. She gets into quickly fight or flight. You know, she protects herself. She either screams or yells or kicks me or runs or whatever. You know, that's a good example where bias could save her life. She could see the danger coming her way. But of course, the other side of it is, if I'm simply doing something innocent, as those people we saw in the video before, and I get shot for it, bias could cost me my life. So the challenge is, how do we understand this phenomenon? Because it's fundamental to our being able to survive. The bias is simply an automatic response that gives us a shortcut to interact with the world in appropriate ways. It's no different than the quick decisions we make about a lot of other things in life. If I throw this at one of you, you don't say, oh, what happens when it gets here? You know, your hand shoots up. It's a fast brain response that's designed to protect us. And 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, when we were living in caves and jungles, we'd see a group of people around a waterhole. We had to determine instantly whether it was us or them, or we died. So we've learned to distinguish between people. And what do you think is, and all this is measurable now, by the way. We can put people on functional magnetic resonating imagery, and we can see the way the brain responds. What characteristic of people do you think is the one that the brain responds most quickly to? Yeah, race, exactly. It's the most visible, first of all, and it's also the most representative of different tribes, different clans, different ways of looking at things. Now, we know gender is an important one, but almost all of us have grown up in family. Virtually every human being has grown up in a family where they had an intimate relationship with somebody of the opposite gender. So we all had mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, you know, whatever, who were the opposite gender, or almost all of us have, certainly. Where race is concerned, of course, that's not necessarily the case. Now, that's changing, and it'll be interesting to see how the research evolves over time. You know, 4 of my 6 grandchildren are of mixed race, and I'm sure everybody here has people in your family, or almost everybody has a family who are mixed race as well. So we'll see how that evolves. But up to now, that's been the case. So underneath this, we begin to look, well, how does this happen? You know, how does it happen particularly that people who say that they're committed to equity for people still do things that demonstrate bias? And how many of you know somebody who, you know, says that they really want to treat people fairly, and yet you see them treating people differently? Just raise your hand. Yeah, great. How many of you see yourself doing that sometimes? Yeah, despite our best intentions, we have these visceral reactions. Now, one of the challenges that we've had, and I was just talking about this morning when we went with some folks in the church, one of the challenges that we've had is we built this conversation around guilt. You know, you should feel bad that you do that, and if you were a better person, you wouldn't. The challenge is, it doesn't live in that domain. It doesn't live in being a better person or not. It lives in visceral responses that we may not even know we have. And when we get guilty, when we lay guilt on it, it actually makes us less likely, less able to see it. Think about it. When you have somebody in your life who makes you feel guilty, do you want to be around them more or less? Right? So guilt is actually a particularly dysfunctional emotion. Responsibility makes a difference. And so I would invite you to listen to this, not as from a standpoint of feeling guilty, but rather, how do I take responsibility for the part of me that reacts in this way? Because I've been trained, and we're going to look at how, by society, to react to people in different ways. So first of all, let's take a look at how the brain works. How much do we really know?
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe. But how did you know? Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was closing the grass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Now, how many of you, overeducated, intelligent, successful people, saw more than 2 or 3 changes in that video? Right? Has nothing to do with intelligence, does it? And has nothing to do with intention. In fact, you knew there was going to be something going on with that video because the context I showed it in, and yet still all of this stuff's going on. Now, how many of you have been in a meeting, a community interaction, some situation where you saw something that was glaringly offensive, glaringly or subtly racist or sexist or whatever it you want to put on it, something that, how on earth does somebody say that? And you said something to somebody else and they said, what are you talking about? How many people had that happen? Yeah. And what do we usually do when people don't see that? What do we make up about them? Yeah, that they're racist or that they're intentional. Yeah. So now I'm not saying, by the way, I want to be really clear. I'm no Pollyanna about this. I've been in some ugly situations, some tense situations in the course of doing this work for my entire adult life, and really more than that, because the first time I went to a civil rights meeting was 50 years ago. And I've been doing this work at some level for my whole life. And so I'm not saying there aren't bad people out there. But overwhelmingly, the issues we deal with in institutions like this and in a lot of our public institutions is not that somebody wakes up in the morning and says, how can I suppress the black people in my organization today? How can I hold down the other people of color? How can I make sure women don't have an opportunity? It doesn't occur that way. It occurs in subtle things that we don't even realize we're doing that cause us to value one person less than we value somebody else, that causes us to believe one person less than we believe somebody else, that cause us to listen to one person more than we listen to somebody else. And that's occurring constantly. It also has to do with actually how we listen. So I'm going to divide the room in half for a minute. So everybody on this side of the room, I'll just draw the line here. What I'd like you to do in just a moment is close your eyes. I won't let them take your stuff. Folks over here, you keep your eyes open. I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to ask you all what you hear. Okay, so over here, close your eyes for a moment. Here we go. Good, so open your eyes. So if you heard ba, ba, raise your hands. Look around the room. Okay, now if you heard something like da, da, or ga, ga, raise your hands. Interesting. All right, I'm going to show the video again. This time you can open and close your eyes at intervals. You'll actually hear a change right before your eyes.
Ba, 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 ba.
Pretty wild, huh? Now, aside from being way cool, what does this teach us? We actually hear with our eyes more than we realize. In this case, it's because we're actually being fed by 2 signals. One is the actual sound, which was ba ba. Over here, you actually heard what was said. The other was the visual effect of reading lips, which we do unconsciously. He was actually, the video is of him saying ga ga. So over here, the brain puts these 2 signals together and morphs them. But we do this all the time. We do it at times like this, for example.
He's the boss. She's bossy. The negative way women are perceived at the office in a new ad for Pantene that's gone viral. It's hit a nerve, so we set out to find the truth. Are women who act exactly the same as men seen differently? Listen to this woman. How do you feel about her as a job candidate?
I know the Windows operating systems like the back of my hand, no problem.
Now,
Oops, sorry.
now, listen to him.
I know the Windows operating systems like the back of my hand, no problem.
The candidates in these videos are actors in a Yale University hiring experiment. The resumes, identical. The interviews, identical.
I'm extremely good at sizing
up people quickly and then delegating responsibility accordingly.
The only difference is gender. But when it comes to who got the job,
I thought the male applicant had better soft skills. I'd say the woman was arrogant and overselling.
in hundreds of evaluations, the female job seekers come off as more aggressive, are rated less likable, and they're less likely to be hired.
Isn't it a catch-22? You're supposed to be strong to get that job, and you're saying if you're too strong, you won't get it.
You need to behave in this dominant way to advance as a woman in the workplace, but you're seen negatively because that's not how we expect women to behave.
And if you think this is just male bias, it's not. Both men and women doing the hiring made the same call.
I think there's a level of arrogance that might be okay to be a manager, but then there's a step above, and I thought she was slightly above that.
So let's talk. And when we revealed our study results,
I was surprised by my reaction.
What does that say about us? We have a long way to go.
Yeah, so we interpret all this through a site. Now this particular thing was around gender, but the same thing might happen around race. So would you mind doing something with me for a moment? Sorry? Would you mind doing something with me for a moment? Just stand up for a second. What's your name? Calvin. Calvin, yes. Good to meet you. So Calvin and I come into a circumstance, we're in a business environment. I'm just choosing Calvin because he's the lowest seating African-American man in the group. We come in, and we both of us get into a circumstance where we get pissed off. And we express our anger in exactly the same way, let's say. The interpretation of me is, what a jerk. The interpretation of Calvin is, angry black man. And along with that comes all the stereotypes that people heard about angry black men. All the angry black men that we've seen portrayed in television as dangerous. All the images we've seen, which we know, of course, because people like the Annenberg School, which study journalism from a completely nonpartisan standpoint, have found that African-American men are portrayed almost 30% more than their population group in terms of seen as criminals. And so that very same action is interpreted differently because that background gives us that interpretation. Thank you, Calvin. I appreciate it. So, as my good friend Sukhvinder Singh Obi, who's at McMaster University in Canada, says, our brains seem to have evolved to be good enough most of the time. And it's important for us to recognize this. You know, I will talk about it from a social standpoint, but it's important before we get there to recognize that this is the way we relate to the world. We relate to the world through that basic paradigm, and fear intensifies this bias. Because if we're already afraid, then any fears that we have in the background, any images that we've seen that are negative are going to be turned up. Think of it in terms of Islamophobia right now. 20 years ago, if you would have seen somebody get onto an airplane in a hijab, it would have just been a curiosity for most people. Today, if people get onto an airplane wearing hijab, for many people, it's like, in fact, Sukhvinder, who I mentioned earlier, he tells me a very funny story. He's a Sikh, and he's turbaned and has a beard. And he says that he has a friend who's also Sikh, and his friend told him the story. He said he was in an airport, and he was sitting in the waiting room, and this guy came in what appeared to be Muslim garb. You know, the man was wearing this. And he said, I noticed that I was kind of watching this guy really carefully and seeing everywhere he goes. He said, then I stopped for a minute and I realized everybody else was looking at me. You know? So this is kind of the nature of the way we engage. Now, one big piece of this is the human tendency towards projection, and this is what we do. We make stuff up about people, and that may come from our personal experience or a background experience. So, for example, what's your name? Is it Donna? Sorry, Donna. Donna's wearing this light lime green jacket, you know, sort of. So let's say I meet Donna for the first time, and I have that first reaction. And we often have instant first impressions of people. Sometimes they're positive. Oh, something about that person I like, or I'm not sure. So let's say, I'm just making this up, but let's say I meet Donna for the first time, and I have that moment. Like, something about her I'm just not comfortable with. You know? What I don't know is that this may be triggering, that lime jacket may be triggering something from my past that I'm not even aware of. Like, let's say, when I was a kid, we used to have sock hops. And some of you have only heard about those, but we used to dance on the gym floor after basketball games, but because the polyurethane in those days wasn't as good as it is now, you took off your shoes, so they were called sock hops. And of course, there was no question of anything other than heterosexuality in those days, so the boys would line up on one side of the room, some of you are nodding, you remember it, and the girls on the other side, and it was always the boys' job to ask the girls to dance. And so this was my big moment. Like I said, I'm just making this up. My big moment, I was going to ask Sally, the girl who I had a crush on, to dance. And this is the first time, you know, so I bravely walk across the room in front of all of my friends, and I ask her to dance. And in front of all my friends, she not only says no, but she laughs at me. And then I have to walk back in front of all my friends. And the whole time I'm saying to myself, I am never doing Astrid again, right? She was wearing a lime green blouse. And without my knowing it, that lime green jacket triggers that memory of that lime green blouse, which is linked in my brain to feelings of rejection. This is how stereotypes manage our lives. We wouldn't logically think that we would do some of the things we're doing because it's not logical. So let me give you a sense of how projection works. I want you to imagine that you're a parent of a grown daughter or son. They're full grown, and they call you and they say, I'm in love. I found the guy in my dreams. Who you hoping for? Right? Well, it turns out that this is John Fetterman. He's the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania. That's his zip code on his arm. He, by the way, is 6'10", 300 pounds. He has a master's degree in policy from Harvard, served in AmeriCorps, did such an amazing job of leading a transformation of the old abandoned steel town that Braddock is, that he was reelected with 75% of the vote and recently ran for Senate. He was finished second in the primary for Senate in Pennsylvania. This is Ted Bundy, the serial killer. Right? Or this one. What do you think, what do you feel when you see this picture? And does it change when you see the rest of it? No. Or does anybody know who these 5 women are? Huh? These are 5 U.S. astronauts. This is my favorite, I have to say. Is this a militia initiation? No. These are 2 men getting married the first day of marriage equality in the state of Washington. This is what we do. Look, this is, by the way, if you've been sufficiently impressed, I'm taking my jacket off, you know. This is what we do. We make stuff up about people. You know, we have an internalized book of rules that we've been taught throughout our lives, and some of those rules are relatively harmless. Shake your hand this way or shake your hand that way, you know, that sort of thing. And some of these rules are downright dangerous or deadly. Those people will get you. Those people are dangerous. Those people are dishonest. Those people are lazy. And we grow up in an environment, and particularly when we grow up in environments where we don't encounter those people, or we have no intimate relationships with those people, then what happens is that becomes the way it is in the world. And it creates schema. And schema are framing mechanisms in the mind, some of you are very familiar with that term, that have us see certain things and not others. Watch a shoe shine person in the airport or in the train station next time, and as you're watching those people walk down the aisle, 3 women, 2 men, and a child, watch what they see. 3 loafers, 2 Florsheim's, and a pair of sneakers. You can watch their eyes and see they're not even looking at the people, they're looking at the shoes, because their schema is survival lives in those shoes. Which ones need to be shined? How can I get a customer? So I can show you how schema works. Take a look at this picture. And if you've seen this before, obviously don't say anything, but if you haven't, let me know, do you see any recognizable image in this picture? Anybody see anything you recognize? Yes, what do you see? A cow. How many people see the cow? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 people. Okay, I'll make it easier for you. Take a look at this picture for a second. Okay, now it should be easier for you to see the cow. There are 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose, and a forehead, right? Anybody who doesn't see the cow? You can stick around later, we'll do a remedial session. Now I'm going to remove the superimposed image, and tell me now if you can avoid seeing the cow in the original picture. Right? Something that wasn't there before, invisible, now you can't help but see. Now look, if I can do that with you with something as silly as this, the little game, how can these identities we live our whole lives in not shape what we see? Our race, our gender, all of these, I could go through the whole list, but you get the point. All of these identities shape what we see. So we see something happening in the world, we frame it through that life experience. So something happens, African-American man is shot by the police, or an African-American woman, and I was saying earlier that we have to be really careful because the narrative, it's interesting because the narrative of our culture has been this is happening to black men, but it's actually happening to black men and black women. And one of the things that's embedded in that is a layer of sexism that gets communicated. Even as we're passionate about racial equity, we don't even realize that we may be sexist in the way we communicate that racial equity. So we look at the same circumstance, and depending who we are in our identity, we may see it different. If you have a young African-American person in your family and you see a young African-American person in one of these scenes, you immediately may resonate, or if you are yourself for that matter, you immediately may resonate with that. You may feel threatened by that personally. You may feel endangered and terrified by that. If, on the other hand, you relate more to the white cop, then you may resonate more with that. It's a natural tendency for us to have rapport and resonation with that which we're similar to. It's almost like a contact lens that gets put over our eyes that has us see the world in different colors. So schema creates background, and background becomes self-reinforcing. We gather the evidence which generally supports that which we believe, and we cast out the evidence that doesn't support it. And we see this as some of these cases happen. So we have a series of cases where police officers have altercations with people, and some of them are very clearly innocent, and some of them are a little bit questionable because it's possible that something did happen, because there are bad people out there who the police do have to deal with. You know, not everybody is innocent. But notice how we have a tendency to want to believe certain things about certain people instantly. You remember when the beer summit happened, the thing with Professor Henry Louis Gates up in, for those of you who don't remember, Skip Gates is one of our nation's leading historians. He's traveling to Asia, comes back to his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is around 2009, I believe. And he can't get into his house, so he breaks his window to get into his front door. Somebody calls the police. 3 police officers show up. Something happens, and he's arrested. We wake up the next morning with the mugshot of one of our nation's leading historians in the morning news. By noon that day, how many of us already knew what happened? Right? Now what we knew might have been in 2 categories. There were those of us for who it was, one more time a black man is hassled by white police officers. Then there were others for whom the narrative was different. It was one more time white police officers are called racist simply because they're doing their job. You know? But the amazing thing was none of us had any of the real information yet. But it didn't stop us from coming to conclusions, did it? Because we want to take the data and put it into that which we already believe. And we do this interpersonally with each other as well. So background creates context, and context is everything in terms of how we see the world. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing around the neurobiology of this. Sorry, about the neurobiology of bias. Because we know now that this isn't by accident it happens. Our brains are actually geared towards doing this. Now, I always, when I'm in some place like because consider myself somewhat of a hobbyist in this area. I'm not a doctor, so whenever I'm in one of these medical environments, I notice the threat response in my brain comes up, that somebody here is going to, there are people here who've forgotten more about this than I'll ever know, so I just want to acknowledge that. But at a very elementary level, we see something out there, Donna's green top, and that's what I mean by catalyzing person or circumstance, something that triggers a response, and I see it through that lens. What happens at that moment? Immediately we know it goes to the fast brain, the limbic system, which is in the green area here. If I were to borrow something from Dan Siegel at UCLA, I'll use my fist as a brain here. It's like where the thumb, it actually would be better if I had 2 thumbs, but that'd be a little weird. But it's deeply embedded in the brain, the limbic system, and really a few different parts. One, the amygdala, which is the core kind of radar system, for lack of a better way of putting it. The amygdala is a fear scanning system of the brain. It's picking up signals at its most basic level to protect us. And it quickly picks up a signal and sends it to the hippocampus, the main memory center of the brain. Green jacket, run over to the file cabinet. Susan in 8th grade. And then to the hypothalamus, which is the air traffic controller of the brain, says, here's what you should do about it. Now at a very fundamental level, it's a good thing we have this very fast brain reaction. When you're driving here this morning, if you drove in a car and somebody stops short in front of you and the taillights come on, you do not want to go to your slow brain and say, what's the best thing to do in this circumstance, right? You'll be in their back seat if you survive at all. There are times when fast brain responses are really life-saving to us and very, very helpful, not to mention the fact that they allow us to function more. But the fast brain can also lead us to make questionable decisions. Now, there's a whole field, I didn't know, a lot of you know, in behavioral economics that's studying this, but let me give you just one example that's not about race, but just shows how we make these bad decisions. This is excuse the fact that it's blurry, but I had to blow it up. This is a subscription offer from The Economist magazine. Now, you notice there are 3 options here. One, $59 for an online subscription. The second, $125 for a paper subscription. And the third, oh my God, a bargain, $125 for both. We get something for free. Madison Avenue knows the triggers. One of the biggest triggers we have is something for free. So what happens? 84% of the people order the bottom option. Some researchers at Duke University said, what if we remove the middle option? What happens then? Now it's a very different choice. $59 for an online subscription or more than twice as much for a paper subscription. I don't need a paper subscription. The choice actually hasn't changed. The illusion of the choice has changed. And this is the key. Our fast brain is making decisions based on this kind of stuff all the time. Now, I want to put this into context. I see, I'm sorry, is it Calvin? Calvin. I see Calvin. My rational brain says, I treat everybody the same. But my fast brain feels a little nervous around him. Both are happening at the same time. And it may not have anything to do with our quality as human beings. About our training, both conscious and unconscious, we'll look more at that. So the slow brain is actually this remarkable part of the human brain, the prefrontal neocortex, which, getting back to Dan's model, is this part. Whoops, sorry about that. This part, 4 to 5 times larger than any other animal relative to body size, 2 to 3 times more active. Human beings have a remarkable capacity for what we call metacognition, the ability to watch ourselves think. This is where we have control sometimes over our impulses. Your kids do something and you're frustrated and you go, all right, settle yourself down. The instinct to smack them is still there, but you get that instinct under control. Or maybe it's your partner who you know, whatever. But the point is, we know that we can control our instincts, and usually this lives in this area. Now, I want to give you a sense of how these two interact with each other. I'm going to show you a series of letter combinations. And what I want you to do is speak out loud the color of the font that you see. Don't worry about what it actually says. Some will be words and some will be just mixed up letters. But what I'd like you to do is to read out loud the color of the font that you see. Let's try one. Okay, ready. And I'm going to go fast. See if you can keep up. Here we go.
Blue, green, orange, yellow, purple, blue, orange, green, orange, purple, blue, purple, yellow.
Yeah, now some of you have to work on your colors, but you're pretty good. All right, let's try it again. Here we go. Ready? Now what happened? Did you feel the tug of war in your brain? That's the tug of war between your slow and fast brain. That's a tug of war between your slow and fast brain. I gave you a very clear slow brain instruction. It was easy the first time. For most of you. Like I said, there you go. The second time, you gave yourself a fast brain instruction. It's an instruction that most of you have been learning since you were 3 years old, which is letter combinations mean words. The same thing happens in that interaction I was just talking about. My slow brain says, I want to treat this person fairly, equitably, they deserve that, everything else. But my fast brain, unconsciously, says, but they're not one of us. They're this way or they're that way. And, of course, stereotypes feed that. So this is happening all the time. Just to give you a sense of comparison, because this is very important in an academic environment. I mean this dead seriously. Academic environments are built on thinking that life goes from here up. Feelings are not validated. The problem is that if we consider the slow brain, the capacity of it to be roughly the size of a milk jug, just to give it a physical, the rest of the brain, the fast brain, is like the Milky Way. Literally hundreds of thousands more fast brain reactions and slow brain reactions. And so we're constantly being fed by these unconscious emotional impulses, but because we don't value them, we don't honor them, we don't pay attention to them, we're like marionettes being led on a string to make these determinations. And this is a real challenge, as I said, especially, as Bob said, I've been working in academic institutions all over the world over the course of especially over the course of the last 10 years. And this is particularly true in the academy because of the fact that we especially think we're supposed to be rational. And in fact, because the value proposition is you need to be rational in order to be valued. So this is going on all the time. Now, what happens during a time of fear? The amygdala takes over the system. Daniel Goleman, the father of emotional intelligence work, calls this an amygdala hijacking. And what happens during an amygdala hijacking is our bodies are constantly being bathed by a cocktail of adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol. This is that feeling that you have of why people aren't sleeping as well now as they used to. And you watch the news at night and you get triggered and then you go to sleep and you can't sleep. You feel restless. It's a cocktail that's designed to save us, to put us on high alert, but when it never goes away, we have post-traumatic stress, in essence. And what we know now is when that happens, 3 major things happen. One is fight, flight, or freeze. So all of a sudden, I trigger that. Another, which is very important to understand in terms of our political world right now, are protective responses, mostly looking for control and authoritarianism. Maybe somebody can save us. Does this sound familiar to what you're seeing in the news? And usually he, by the way. We usually look for a man, historically. I'm not saying we should, I'm saying we do. It's no accident that virtually every time that a democratic society has moved towards totalitarianism, it's been at a time when there was massive upheaval in the society. Nazi Germany, Mussolini, the Taliban, all of these cases where there was upheaval in society, please, somebody give us stability. And that strong father figure is who we tend to look for at that time. And the other thing that we do is we tend to think that it's permanent, pervasive, and personal. It's all around and it's going to get me. Fascinatingly enough, more than 2/3 of people living in rural environments in the United States in a recent poll said that they feel personally vulnerable to terrorist attack. Rural environments. Now, there's no rationale to justify that. But here's how it works. We take a small group, a real threat that's directed from a small group of people. So let's think about it in terms of Islamophobia. There is a real threat that there are certain people who are Muslims who are also terrorists. That's a real threat, in the world. Now, most of us know that out of 1.5 billion Muslims, that's a relatively small percentage. But we take that real threat and turn it into a perceived threat about all the people in that group. Because when the mind is in panic mode, is in an amygdala hijacking, it's safer for me to stay away from all of you than it is for me to choose which one of you I have to be careful about. You get that? It's just, never mind, just keep them away from me. Again, this sounds familiar in what we're hearing, right? So in the political environment, of course, what we then do is we demonize people because we've got not a lot of connection with each other. So over here you see that, and over here you see that. This is the nature of how it shows up. Actually, I'm going to pass this slide. And the place where politics and race sort of overlap are really important because we're beginning to see that there's a political divide in this country like nothing we've ever seen before, and it almost completely overlays around race. If you're looking at any of the polls, you know that overwhelmingly Democrats generally tend to get more of the vote of color in our country, especially African American and Latino vote, and Native American, although the Asian vote is moving more in that direction as well now. And the white vote generally votes Republican, right? So there's been people who've been studying this in terms of the segregation. What they find is they call it the Whole Foods Cracker Barrel divide. Because it turns out that there's actually legitimate social science behind this. It's not just cute. That if you look at people who live around Whole Foods, that they generally represent more liberal, progressive politics and democratic politics. If you look at people who live around Cracker Barrel, it's the opposite. So these researchers tracked this over a long period of time. And what they found was that in 1992, that divide was about 20%, measuring the percentage of people who voted Democratic. 8 years later, it had jumped to 32%. 8 years after that, it jumped to 45%. Pew just found that it's gone up to 67% now. And if we look at our political structure, which once again is analogous to our racial structure, back in 1972, this is what it looked like. You had predominantly Republicans on the conservative side and predominantly Democrats on the progressive side, but you had a lot of crossover. You had those of us who remember the anti-war days of this time. You had the Scoop Jackson Democrats who were pro-Vietnam. You had the Mark Hatfield Republicans who were against Vietnam. You had the Northern liberal Republicans, what we used to call the Rockefeller Republicans, who were more liberal on social issues. You had the James Eastland Democrats from the South who were much more conservative on social issues. And there was this big bell curve, and a lot of people in the middle who would come up with compromises of various kinds. Now we have a dumbbell curve. And that is that the most conservative Democrat is considered more progressive or more liberal than the most liberal Republican. And almost nothing in the middle. This is why our government is in lockstep right now, why it can't move forward, or locked down, I should say. And once again, this falls on racial lines as well. Why is the tension in our community increasing? Well, one reason is because, like I said before, we're seeing more, we're aware of more, that all of a sudden that which African Americans, for example, always knew what was going on, or people who worked in the African American community who knew what was going on, now all of a sudden it's public because we got it on video. So this is going on all the time. That's the 67 I talked about. Now, it's important to recognize a part of this. Bob talked about my interest in this whole topic of belonging, which I'm beginning to research for this new book, is because Abraham Maslow, created his. How many people know of Maslow's hierarchy? Yeah, it's Psychology 101, right? Maslow in 1943 created this model, and he said, you've got to have certain things before you get other things. You're going to make sure you get food before you worry about some of these other things. Well, it turns out we're now finding out that Maslow may have been wrong. That in fact, what the neuroscience research is teaching us is that belonging is our key human need. And it makes sense if you think about it. What's the most vulnerable time of a human being's existence? Yeah, infancy. If you don't belong to somebody, you die. For the first couple of years of your life, if you don't belong to anybody, you die. So the first message we get is, I exist because you exist. And in fact, what the research is telling us now is that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. You know, we want to fit in with people around us. We want to be part of the group and part of the way the group operates. And so we tend to associate with people like us. Now let's look at how this is fed by what we're seeing. It used to be that we all watched the same media and we came up with different interpretations. You know, because ABC, NBC, CBS, there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the news. Not to mention the fact that in those days, news people were not supposed to talk about opinions. It was considered unethical. If a news person back when I was growing up talking about opinions, it would be like they would be considered to be no longer credible as a journalist. Now we have a very different environment. Now we watch different news stations and we see pre-interpreted news. Because somewhere between 40 and 80% of what's on the news is punditry. And so if you watch Fox, then you get a steady stream, and you feed that also by your Facebook page, by your Twitter feed, by your friends who send you the blogs that they like, and yada, hana, 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 right? And we live in an echo chamber. And so you see it in profound ways. I was watching tonight, remember when a couple months ago when Congressman Lewis led that sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives? People know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I happen to be, so my wife and I, really out of this research, have started now, we watch multiple news stations, especially when there's an important political event. Like after a debate, we'll flip between CNN, MSNBC, and Fox to just get a sense of what different kinds of people are perspective. By the way, I really encourage you to do it. I know it's painful to watch that other station, whichever it is for you, but I can't encourage you enough to do it because it will give you a sense of why people see the world the way they do. Well, that night we started watching CNN, and CNN was covering the story, the sit-in, about 80% of the time, and occasionally flashing back to other stories. We did this in half-hour increments. Then we watched MSNBC. Rachel Maddow was on. It was 100%. No other story was covered in a half hour. Then we switched to Fox. Not a word about it. You wouldn't have known it was going on. Now, I'm not saying that to just blame Fox, because there are times when the reverse is true. You know, it's the same thing. The point is, we focus on what's important to us. So, fearful times intensify this us versus them thinking, and it actually, you know, once we have an us, we want to act like our people. So some of you have experienced this. You might have a different opinion from people like you, and they say, what's wrong? You're not black enough, or you're not this enough, or you're not that enough. You know, we have a tendency to want to feel comfortable in the group. Ironically, this search for belonging to our group creates greater fracturing in our culture, because the us that we see is not all of us, it's part of us. And so they, of course, become abnormal, sinful, sick, illegal, unacceptable outsiders, non-dominant, or incapable, while we are normal, righteous, healthy, legal, acceptable insiders, dominant, and capable. And the beat goes on and on. Now let's look at it in terms of this word. We know that there's tension, or these words, with tension around these three words. You have some people who say, what are you talking about, Black Lives Matter? All lives matter. And there are other people who say, that's racist. You know, Black Lives Matter because black people are in danger. What we don't realize when we look at these three words is that we're not arguing about three words. We're arguing about four. But the fourth word is invisible, and it's different for the two groups. See, for one group, it's this. That's what they hear. For another group, it's this. But because we don't talk about what actually is at the base of the argument, we think we're arguing about the same thing. And we could take this, by the way, this is just one example. We could take it into almost anything in our lives that we see. And fear is also fed by what we're exposed to. So I want to show you a couple of examples of this. This is a story, two stories that were, I was teaching a program at Harvard Medical School spring before last. And this story happened to come out in the middle of the program. Two burglaries that were committed in Iowa within one day of each other. This is the first story. 3 University of Iowa arrested for burglary charges. You could see this picture. This is the second one. 4 men arrested for burglary investigation. Now look at these pictures. Frat boys gone wild. thugs. And here's one that's even more interesting.
Meantime, 2 teenagers are wounded on the city's south side. It happened at East 74th. As an 18-year-old man and 16-year-old girl were hit while standing on the sidewalk. Male's in good condition while the girl's expected to recover. And kids on the street, as young as 4, were there to see it all unfold and had a disturbing reaction.
Well, I'm not scared of nothing.
When you get older, you gonna stay away from all these guns?
No.
No? What do you want to do when you get older?
Who had me a gun? Because I live right here and I don't want none of my family members to get shot.
That is very scary indeed. So far, no suspects are in custody.
Yeah, it's very scary, isn't it? Especially that little 4-year-old boy. It's heartbreaking, isn't it, to see? Let me show you something that's more heartbreaking. This is another video of that interview with the little boy taken by a bystander with their cell phone.
That's what I like to hear. You ain't scared of nothing. Damn. When you get older, you gonna stay away from all these guns?
No.
No?
No.
What do you want to do when you get older?
Who had me a gun?
You are? Why you want to do that? You know what happens?
I'm going to be the police.
Okay, well, I'm not doing that.
A little different narrative, isn't it? Look, we need to wake up and watch what we're watching. And we need to know that sometimes this stuff happens because journalists see certain things and they don't see other things, and sometimes it happens because they want to promote a particular narrative. But one way or the other, unless we're watching broadly, we're not going to see it. So fear becomes generative in this case. We have our fear, whatever it is. In terms of race, I'm afraid of white cops, let's say. Let's say I'm an 18-year-old African-American man. I'm afraid of white cops. That creates a particular behavior. A white cop comes to my car, and all of a sudden I'm in panic mode. I start to feel very nervous and awkward and uncomfortable. And that behavior has an impact on the police officer. Says, this person's acting suspicious. Right? And so that impact causes either hurt or anger. I'm going to gain control of this situation. And I don't have time to get into what we're learning about the psychology of certain police officers that make them be that way, but a lot of it has to do not so much with their racial values as their macho values. I'm not going to, I'm going to teach him who's boss, and then I do what I do, which creates even more fear. And that cycle spins and spins and spins. So, how do we break that cycle? How do we move forward? I just want to take a few more minutes to do that, and then we'll have a few questions, okay? The first is to acknowledge the reality that people are dealing with. We can't avoid this anymore. We have to acknowledge that this fear lives in us every day. It lives in our organizations. It lives in our homes. It lives in our schools. It lives in our hospitals. And it's there. And we need to be able to talk about it in a constructive way. We need to be able to own that it's going on with us. I'm afraid right now. And when I make that, when I'm willing to own that and be responsible for it, then I have a chance of working with it. Part of that is becoming an observer of how that fear is actually impacting you. What is it causing you to do? Another is to recognize that we can't change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. We live in resistance to what is. I remember when I started doing civil rights work, I was 15 years old, and we used to go over to Laurel, Maryland, a few of us, to this Black Baptist church that was there. And there were about 3 or 4 of us who were white kids in this church, and there was this woman, her name was Maybelle Jones, and she was this older African-American woman. She was probably 50 at the time, but she seemed so old to me at 18 or 16, whatever I was. And she kind of put her arms around us and was our mentor. And Maybelle used to have all these kind of homespun wisdom, and one that stuck with me her whole life. She said, things ain't about what they're supposed to be, they're about what they is. Rather than being in resistance to it, this is what we're dealing with, how are we going to deal with it? And we live a lot in that it shouldn't be that way, as opposed to it is that way, we need to deal with it. What are some things you could do? Start watching and listening to other media sources. Get the view of what's behind this, because what's underneath it is fear. When you look at some of these supporters, these intensely racist white supremacists, we get their anger, we get their ugliness, but underneath that is fear. I'm losing control of my country. I'm not saying that makes it sympathetic, but it at least can give us a better idea of what we're dealing with and how we need to deal with it. The second is to open a dialogue in a constructive way in your company, your school, your organization, your hospital, your community, to find people. You won't find all of them. It's not going to live on the extremes for the most part, but to find people in that middle ground who want to have a dialogue, who want to try to understand each other. You know, your neighbor who you know is a nice person, but somehow is supporting that other candidate. Say, look, I really care about you. I would love to have a better way to understand it. I'll give you a tool for doing this in just a minute. Talk to your children. This is really important because kids are being raised now to hear that they are that way. You know, so we want to talk to our children and give our children some sense of how to do that. And the other is this great tool, which I borrowed from Elizabeth Lesser and adapted a little bit, called Take the Other to Lunch. And here's how this works. So this one, I'll pause for a minute. You can all snap a picture of this if you want in just a moment, okay? First of all, to find somebody who's from some other point of view who you want to have a conversation with, and start with ground rules. We're not here to persuade each other. We're not here to interrupt each other. We're here to be curious, to authentic, and listen just to understand each other. That's the only purpose of this conversation, not to convince you of my point of view. Then asking 4 questions. The first is, what are some of the life experiences that have led you to feel this way? You know, why do you feel this way? The second is, what about these issues deeply concern you? See, this is the real trigger question, because at the core of it is always fear. And if we can get people to talk about their fear rather than their reaction to the fear, then there's some hope we can reach each other. This was the huge breakthrough when Jimmy Carter was negotiating. I got a chance to read the transcripts of the negotiation of the mediation that Jimmy Carter did with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin years ago. You know, the peace treaty that he was able to sign. And they went back and forth for days until at some point Carter said, you know what, let's stop talking about Israel. Let's stop talking about Egypt. Talk to me about your grandchildren. What's the world you want for your grandchildren? And when they started to talk about their grandchildren, they realized that they had common goals, common purposes that they were to, and from there they were able to come back and say, how do we get from where we are to there? What have you always wanted to ask somebody from the other side? What are those questions, those assumptions you have that you'd like to check out? And then the last one, which is the one I added, is there anything you'd like to say to clean up the past? In other words, maybe it's, you know what, I've been judging you as stupid, I've been judging you as inconsiderate or hateful, and I realize now that you're coming from your fears and concerns. And I still don't agree with you, but I can understand that doesn't make you a bad person. And I want to apologize for judging you in that way. No, because the reason that's important is because unless we complete the past, we drag it with us like a ball and chain on our leg. It's always there in the future. So go ahead, take a picture real quick. You don't need me in the picture. Okay, good. And then the last is to be an ally. And that is not to wait for them to solve their problem, whoever they are. To reach out and create allyship. And allyship doesn't mean taking care of people. It doesn't mean being patronizing or paternalistic. It means standing side by side with them and realizing that we have a common destiny. That if we have racial tension in our country, that doesn't only affect people of color. If we have gender inequity in our country, it doesn't only affect women. It affects the entire culture that we're living in. And we need to find time. Now, a lot of times the things that we do to protect ourselves, like forming like groups, can actually get in the way of actually building something different. So for example, one of the things we're doing with our clients who have employee resource groups is say, rather than have a women's employee resource group, have a gender equity employee resource group, which invite men and women who want gender equity in the organization. Instead of having an African-American employee resource group, invite allies who also want to have racial equity in the organization. And it doesn't mean that sometimes you can't meet separately and then share what you came up with, but at least we've got people working together as allies to move it forward. It's only that will help us move forward. You want to create communities of sport so that we don't get discouraged, because none of us can do this on our own. And I like to end with this picture, because it's an aspen forest. Bless you. An aspen forest, because there's something really interesting about aspen trees. So how many of you have seen the aspen forest out west? Yeah, they're amazing. You know, these thousands and thousands and thousands of trees, 80 to 100 feet tall, covering a mountainside. But there's something quite remarkable about aspen trees that for me it's a perfect metaphor for who we are as human beings. And that is, they're not individual trees at all. They're connected by a common root system. The way aspen trees grow is one tree sends out a runner and another tree and another tree. They're actually the largest intact organisms in the world. The largest one that they found in northern Utah, 8,000 trees, one plant. For me, it's a perfect metaphor for who we are as human beings. On the surface, we have these differences we see. And they're important, and we have to take that into consideration, our lived life experiences. But underneath the surface, what we realize now is that we actually process the world quite similarly. We have different data we use to process, but the way we process is quite similar. So if we get that, then what it means is rather than, why do you see it that way? My question might be, why do you see it that way? And bringing that curiosity can help us create environments in which everybody can thrive. Thank you all so much. Now, I realize we've run a little late. I'm glad to stick around if there are some questions. So any questions or comments anybody would like to make? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much. One of the things that I was thinking as you were speaking was just,
That's okay.
I'm pretty
That's
loud.
okay.
Was just how I internalize bias and how I have my own self-bias.
Yes.
And for I feel comfortable sharing, but I work in the nonprofit sector, and I have an internalized bias in much of the work that I do, that I am, sort of the stereotype, a white woman, and, that civilizing missionary, and so I sometimes go into my work with those preconceived notions and feelings, and they're on such a, guttural level that,
Yep.
So I'm just curious about that sort of individualized, that self-bias, and how we deal with that.
Yeah.
As well as
great.
with
Yeah,
others.
it's really we saw a little bit of that in the study where it said that females rated the candidates the same way as male candidates, and this is for me one of the most insidious forms of bias, is that we internalize that into our own system, and at some point we're almost self-regulating. We no longer even have to be told by society we're less than, because we've so internalized that. And just this morning in the community group we were talking about this, the notion of the fact that, for example, I know most of my African American friends grew up in an environment where they were told they needed to work twice as hard to be seen as just as good. Well, you put that into the head of a 4-year-old, and what does a 4-year-old make that mean? Maybe I'm only half as good. And no matter how much that child then accomplishes in their life, underneath that is this conversation, yeah, but I got to keep working because I'm only half as good, I'm only half. Now, mom and dad didn't intend that. That wasn't their intention, but that's the interpretation. The same thing is true for women in the workplace. We see that women have as many unconscious biases about women in the workplace as men do. Even though on the surface, on the conscious level, women are far more likely to believe that they should be treated equally in the workplace than men. On an unconscious level, there's almost no difference. And so if you're a woman and you're, for example, offered flex time because you're having a baby and your company or your organization says you could have flex time, what do? I better not take it because I already have a concern whether or not I belong, and if I do this, I won't belong. So that's an incredibly important area for us to look into. Yeah. We have to stop? Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I ran over.
Apologies to the 53 people who would like to ask questions, but we do need to
clear the room.
We need to allow class to come in.
Okay. I'll be glad, for any of you who'd like to stick around for a few minutes, I'll be glad to sit around outside and answer a few questions, okay? Thank you.